Hi everyone, my name is Sam. I'm the founder of OnCanada Project, and I'm excited to chat with everybody about Trans Day of Visibility and to have Fae Johnstone from Wisdom to Action join us as well to talk about this really important day and better understand the role we all get to play and all need to play in allyship and in solidarity with trans people in Canada and around the world.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Happy Trans Day of Visibility.
Happy Trans Day of Visibility. I'm so excited I get to spend a piece of it with you.
I have been looking forward to doing this all day.
Oh, I'm so excited. So how has your day been? How has your week been, your month, your...
My day has been absolutely stellar. It has been, I've just like drowning in positive messages, like not only like about me or directed at me, but just like celebration of trans people. And a lot of folks speaking out and talking about all of the nightmare that's going on right now and drawing attention to. So it's been very good. Though I am also very tired because T-Dub is always a labor of love for trans people.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like let's maybe jump into this past month and start there, and then we'll get into like the double-edgedness with that and the visibility stuff in there. So I feel like I had such a so this is gonna, I'm gonna own that, like, I think of myself as an ally to trans people as a cis woman, and I believe in the human rights component. I believe in the just be your full and true self, and whatever that means, go for it. And I knew there was trans hate. It's not like I was like, trans hate isn't a thing. And then I started responding to comments about the chocolate bar stuff that Fox News really like amplified and in their way of spreading hate and anger and violence. And then I saw a degree of hate and confusion and anger on the internet that I, truthfully, as a racialized woman, had no idea existed. Like, I thought I saw hate on the internet. And then when I started talking about trans stuff online and started responding to people, who were confused about chocolate, I don't know what they were like. I just was like, holy fuck, this is not the same type of hate. This is like next level hate. And I just I don't even know where I'm going with this, other than like, whatever you people watching this who are cisgendered people that are watching this, whatever you think anti-trans hate is, it is a billion times worse. Like, I just really, and I'm so sorry. It's just so messed up that that's out there, that people are so angry instead of, curious and compassionate and willing to learn, which is like, you don't have to agree with everything off the bat. Like, do your research if that's what you need to do. But to choose anger and hate is very gross. But yeah, I think that really introduced me to like the double-edgedness of your role. And I wanted to sort of volley this back to you and ask if you wanted to sort of, speak to that, or, yeah.
Yeah, and then thank you, Sam. I think like the thing that I'll get into the nightmare that has been my month in a hot second, but I think like one of the lessons, or one of the moments in it that I think is heartbreaking yet positive is I think it's opened a lot of folks' eyes to not just like the degree of hate, but the fact that the kind of hate is actually different. And I would never equate, hate is hate, and hate is everywhere, and it hits us all in different ways. And I see what folks like Erica and Phil have gone through. I see what Black and racialized and Indigenous journalists have gone through, and I'm like, I can't imagine, like, they get stomped on in a huge way and in a different way. And that's where I think I'm hoping folks are seeing that piece, because in community we talk about trans misogyny as a concept, and it's in particular the like vilification and dehumanization of trans women, and that is very much like, it means that the tone of the hate that is sent my way and the way of other trans gals, and particularly Black, Indigenous, and racialized trans women, is really, it has a different flavor to it, and it's meant to hit in a different kind of way. And I'm sorry that I was watching live as they came for you as well, and I was saying like, I have so much appreciation for the fact that you were like you know, pushing back and punching back. And I can't imagine, like, they came for you too because of that. And so they come for anyone who,
For sure.
who is trans or who dares to, like, they come for cis women who speak out on trans rights as if they're traitors in a horrible kind of way.
But they, and I mean, like, what a testament to your character too, Faye, that like you reached out to me during your chaos to be like, hey girl, you okay? Like, it looks like they're really coming for you. And I was like, do not do that. Don't check in on me. I am experiencing a portion of what your life is like anytime you choose to take up space. So like, I mean, I adore you. You're my friend. I appreciated it. But also I was like, this can't be how it works right now. She's the one that's dealing with all this. Like, and I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. But like, that is such a reflection of the hate and division that persists in Canada and in like the West in general with regards to anti-trans everything. And it's just like, bro, let people live. Like, why are you so fucking interested? There's like a climate crisis. There's cost of living is going, like, pick something else. Why are you so angry about a thing you know nothing about?
Right. Like, it's not like, I'm like, I hate, you know, I hate, like, there's the anti-trans feminists, and the thing that breaks my heart is, like,
feminists.
I would rather, like, right, and they're absolutely, they are traitors to feminism at this point. There's more in common with the far right than they have in common with any genuine feminist. But it's like, we have, like, a gender-based violence crisis. Like, there's patriarchy, there's a gender crisis. That, like, fight GBV, don't fight trans people.
I can't wrap my brain around it. And I think, I want to pause for a second, because I think TERFs try to claim that they are feminists, and I wholeheartedly reject that. I refuse any feminism that isn't intersectional isn't feminism. It's about that individual's own power and privilege, and that's not cute. That's not what we want. That's not the movement. That's not what this is meant to be doing. So like, I reject, like, TERFs is not a real thing. You are a bigot. Like, and if you're someone who's
most
like
feminists and can't, like, and this is my I love my, like, if you know, feminism, it does not just live in our national and community feminist orgs. It is grassroots and feisty. But at the same time, it says a lot that, like, almost every single feminist organization in Canada wants nothing to do with these transphobic women. Like, they're not nobody. We want distance from them because they're a bad time and they hurt the movement in a million ways, because they're gonna hang out with pro-lifers next, then fascists and like neo-Nazis and all those bad folks.
And I one of the things that I was saying back to a lot of these people who were saying I was betraying the feminist movement because I was saying that trans women are women, I was like, man, you know, they said the same thing about Black people and people of color back in the day. They said the same thing about women back in the day. They'd be like, you're not a person, right? You're not equal. And to not understand that that is the exact same logic you are now applying to trans women and trans folks. I just like it just boggles my brain. And then I also recognize like there's true agents and like hate out there that's being like spread. I don't know what I'm doing with my hands, but like there's like real hate. Like, you know, when we look at Fox Media and we look at all these other spaces that are like really sending out hate, and we're not seeing an equal and opposite like force for good. And that kind of just lets the hate lay, like, and infuse and go. And so it always boggles me that we don't see that sort of language to combat it. I know we see a little bit. I know the Prime Minister said a little bit about, you know, standing in solidarity with trans women, but we need like real campaigns as a country to combat the hate, because this can't be where we stop. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, but I think maybe I'm now it's time to tell. I'll tell the story.
Please do.
So for anyone who's joining, I am like, I do a lot of like trans advocacy work. I do writing, I do media stuff. I like to yell at governments about queer and trans issues. And I try to do a lot of like intersectoral stuff. So like bring in the gays, the trans folks, the women, the feminists, doing like building, you know, bridges and coalitions. And in the past 6 months, I've been stomped on, I think 4 times by anti-trans and far-right groups. It started when I happened to be present at the launch of Canada's Twist LGBTQI+ action plan, and I'd run into the minister the night before at an airport by pure coincidence, and we had a chat. And so she mentioned me during the action plan. She mentioned me like in passing, just as a like trans woman or woman, and then made eye contact. It was really cute and kind of awkward. She was like, trans woman or woman, Fae, trans woman or woman, and it was wholesome as hell. And out of that, Sue Ann Levy, who writes for the True North Center, wrote a piece that was about Trudeau appeasing radical trans activists. I love, like, there's a lot of good in this action plan, but it's not largely about trans people. Like, we are lost as the T in the LG and B more often than not. So that started a whole thing. They've come for me a few times since, but it really, you know, blew itself into a whole new kind of tsunami at the start of March. So I had Hershey's Canada, the chocolate bar people, reach out to me to be included alongside 4 other phenomenal young women who are change makers across different sectors, from like tech to water protection to like climate justice and everything else. And we were included, the 5 of us, in a campaign to celebrate International Women's Day, which was like a huge thing. And I've never done, like, I am an anti-capitalist. I am a socialist. Like, I had to really think of like, do I want to do this thing? But it was cool, and it was an opportunity, and I could just imagine like the young trans folks and trans girls seeing like my face on a chocolate bar and just having a smile and like the impact that could have. So on March 1st, the campaign went live. So I posted with a 15-second clip that was my little snippet in the campaign on Twitter. And within an hour, it was getting quote tweets from far-right groups, largely in Canada. And then somehow it got onto the radar of the far-right in the United States. And out of nowhere, I had, in a period of 24 hours, Tucker Carlson, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, as well as Michael Knowles, who the day after doing a segment on me, called for the extermination of trans people from public life. As folks may have seen. And in the 3 weeks that followed, I received thousands of hateful messages, mentions, tweets, and emails in my inbox. I received encouragements to all kinds of self-harm and bad things from both like the far right, from the Christian right, from TERFs, from every kind of bigot you could possibly imagine. I had my dead name shared publicly by Matt Walsh on a video that's been viewed by, I think, over 150,000 people. And I now have people responding to tweets of mine if I don't keep them locked or reply. Friends only can reply with my dead name, and quote tweeting with my dead name, and creating ugly memes and caricatures and all of that damn stuff. Simply for being one of 5 people on a chocolate bar. And I think that like just speaks to the degree of, like, they don't care about trans people as human beings. They just see us as a wedge and a tool that they can use to roll back so many levels of progress that we've made for gender equity, for gender norms, for, you know, human rights and diversity generally. And it's just been an absolute shit show ever since.
I mean, like, I've said this to you. I'm sorry that this has been your experience. I never really think about Hershey's chocolate in general, because like that's not something. But I was so excited and was like, now if I want chocolate, that's the brand I'm going to support, because they look at them like, you know, taking up space in a way that matters. And I think the other important thing is that this was a Canadian campaign. Like, every country that Hershey's is in did their own campaign. So it's like also extra weird that like it got picked up by America. Like it's just kind of like, bro, get your own chocolate. Like, if you don't like it, don't buy it. I don't like it.
Like,
just like,
there was news coverage in India, in Brazil, in the UK, and I'm like, like, it's a chocolate bar that even like, and it's around, but like it's not in most Canadian stores. Like, it's in,
track
like,
to find it.
Yeah, you gotta kind of hunt for it. Like,
yeah, it's such a bizarre response to something that like obviously has nothing to do with chocolate, nothing to do with you being on it. But like, I don't know how to reconcile in my brain this like rise of anti-trans rhetoric. And then I think equally scary So I think there's like this far right stuff that we have to be scared of. There's like conservative, whatever the conservative movement is in theory and what we are seeing currently practiced is two different things. But the right wing movement of anti-trans, like everything, and that is scary, is horrifying, it's terrifying. And then I think, and I'll own this as well, I think for cis people on the left, we're like part of the we'll post, but we like then go away. And this is the issue with any human rights thing, right? Like I'm sure, like with the BLM movement, with Indigenous rights, you know, we dabble and then we run away back into our like privileged lives. But particularly, I think with trans like justice and trans like lives matter and trans rights and all that, there seems to be like a lack of understanding even on the left or on the side of people who historically side with human rights to find the words to in a room where someone's being like, well, it makes sense that they're banning kids from X, Y, and Z, or it makes sense, and like it just sits there in the room because people don't know how to respond to it, and that silence is loud. Like if we,
and I think like to me, I often think about like a symptom of transphobia is the deprioritization of transphobia. And so, you know, when we talk about, like, the left has a million issues, right? Like, the world is ending, climate crisis, like, raging white supremacy. Like, there is a lot of stuff to deal with. But I think there is an idea, that, like, trans people are such a small part of the population that why bother? I also think there is a like subtle transphobia in the hesitance folks have to engage in and support trans people. And a lot of like, I don't expect everyone to understand everything about me. I don't understand anything. I don't understand everything about anybody. And so there is like conversation and dialogue. And I work with folks from like working class tradespeople all the way up to like social workers and doctors. Like I am always down to have a conversation about how gender is weird and the world is weird and these are colonial Western gender norms that are rooted, like we can have that conversation. But what I've noticed is, and what worries me is that the far right is setting trans people up as a symbol, and they're setting us up as like a symbol of what they don't want the world to look like. That is a world where gender diversity doesn't exist, where gender nonconformity doesn't exist either. So that means that our butch women in our communities, our feminine men in our communities are going to be policed, are going to be targeted, and it fuels this like fear and anxiety of gender nonconformity based off of a depiction of trans people that will lead to other folks experiencing violence and harassment. And just like we saw in the US, this actually didn't start with trans people, like this started with colonialism and white supremacy. But the latest expression of transphobia was used as a launching pad to begin attacks on reproductive rights, on abortion access. What the attack we're seeing right now to restrict trans women from sports is resulting in folks having to submit menstrual data to state regulators to approve access to different sporting leagues. Imagine how you stop a trans woman like a trans woman like me from, if I needed it, from going to a women's shelter. Are we going to start like, how are you going to like universally assess people's womanhood? To do that is reliant on a horrific invasion of privacy. And so trans rights now in particular, it is just like, we need to care just because we're trans people, and trans people deserve rights and goodness and equity, diversity, liberation, and all of those good things. But if they can come for us, if they can dehumanize us, if they can make you hate us, they can leverage that to come for the next people. And so we have seen an evolution of rights over the years, and like the right has lost most of the time. But I think this is a place where they're trying to create a wedge from which they can target the rights of a variety of other marginalized peoples. And they could bring us back to this like 1950s imagination of a world that never really existed. But it's one where women's rights were not a thing, where racialized folks' rights were not a thing. Like, that is an ideal to them that they're trying to bring us back to. And if we let them come for trans folks, it's going to only get worse for everybody else.
And I think that's really important because it is this like, it's a tactic, right? Like they can't come for cis white women right away.
Yeah.
right? Like they've got to get their foot in the door of like take away people's rights and to limit things. You have to find something that feels like you can get enough people on board to keep it, and then progressives will not engage too much because we're not directly impacted sometimes. And it's just like how do they get their foot in? And then you're right, with the abortion access stuff, like in the States, we saw how quickly they were able to, and I mean, like, they've been planning it, but like how quickly they were able to take away a constitutional right. And I think when they come, like, it's like if they can come for one of us, they can come for all of us. And we've got to stop being like, oh, thank God it's not me. And instead be like, oh shit, I'm next. So like at the very least, selfishly, I need to get engaged. And like that shouldn't be the reason why we do it. But like at the very least,
it's on
like,
principle, but I'll have you in the fight for whatever reason I can get you to tap into the fight, because we need you in this fight. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And I think, yeah, I don't know, like, what do you think? Do you feel that because I always say on our team that like if it can happen in America, it can and probably has happened in Canada. It's just like our media landscape is different. So and we have a smaller population, so you might not hear of it in the same way you do in the States. How do we feel like the state of trans lives are here? Like how safe is it here? Systemically, but also like at a like a community individual level.
Yeah. So I like this when I train like social workers, I say, 84% of trans people avoid at least one public space due to fears of harassment. And that doesn't mean that trans folks are like terrified every time we leave our houses. It doesn't mean that we are harassed or like have slurs thrown at us every time we leave our houses. It means that the risk of that happening is such that we always have to be aware of the associated safety concerns. Mm-hmm. And that is, to me, like for my life as a trans woman, is that like, it's not that it's always bad, but every day there's at least one person who's going to look at you weird and is going to remind you that you have to be worried for the guy who does more than look at you weird. In Canada, 48% of trans people make under $30,000 a year. Trans people face huge barriers accessing housing, accessing employment. We have whole generations and more trans folks being kicked out of their homes by unaccepting families who who have a hard time finishing degrees, a hard time going to university, meaning that their economic prospects are negatively impacted for the rest of their lives amidst the housing crisis. We have housing services that are starting to come along, but still aren't often equipped to support trans and gender diverse folks who are street involved. We have, barriers to access to healthcare. We have this like pervasive problem of online violence that is only getting worse, and online hate. And so, my best way of describing Canada right now is we're not as bad as the US. We're not as bad as the UK. We have some really good things going for us that I hope will protect us. I think the idea of Canada as a multicultural, diverse country is often like a smokescreen to hide white supremacy, colonialism that is rooted here and growing here. But I wonder and I hope that the idea of that, like the idea that we're supposed to be that way, can still be at least a bit of a bulwark. And I have no doubt that our feminists, our labor, our social justice allies will not pass on the principle of trans rights. And so they will stand on principle. And that is an advantage. That is part of what has screwed over the UK, because the TERFs went wild in the UK. And so I think we're better. We're in a better position. But the position we're in socioeconomically has never been good for trans people. Right. And we don't have a strong queer and trans sector and movement, and like we're badasses, we're activists, but like we're still building the kind of infrastructure as a community and as a sector that others have long had. And my worry is, there's one, maybe two national trans organizations, which is a great opportunity to shout out Justice Trans. We're new and doing a lot of work on access to justice and understanding justice concerns and addressing them for trans people. But I don't know, like there are not many organizations by and for trans people that are ready to step into this fight. And a lot of us get a lot of symbolic support, but my worry is that it's lukewarm support. And I'm worried that we're going to see, what we're seeing right now from the US. What happened to me is an example of how US extremism is infiltrating into Canada. And the convoy is another. And so I'm worried that on the trans side of that rising extremism, we don't have the tools, the resources, or the political will to combat anti-trans hate and rising misinformation. For example, I'm still waiting for somebody at the Toronto Star or the Globe and Mail to have written the op-ed that was like, what happened to me was a nightmare and shows how bad it is, but nobody did that.
Right.
I got some nice news coverage. I had a chance to chat on some great TV shows, but it's the fact that I worry that the establishment left, the writer left, the columnist left, and a lot of folks in that similar space in the left relegate trans issues to a moral issue that they've already settled because their organization says we like trans people, and they post a statement on TDOV. And it's that worries me, that we're not, again, seeing our allies and our champions and our leaders on the left engaging in the actual argument and the like ideological, like the defense of trans rights in a public battle. They're leaving it to the few trans folks in the public eye. And that's maybe like, there's a lot of great work on the local level, but like you can list the amount of trans people with a platform and the ability to reach national news on like one hand, maybe two if you're lucky. Because we are a tiny portion of the population and we don't have the infrastructure and we are socioeconomically disadvantaged. So we need those columnists to back us up now, but they're not doing it. And that causes me a lot of worry.
So what does that look like in like practice? Like, so what do you wish they were speaking to on a regular?
Wish they were writing articles about how the rise in anti-trans hate around the world is alive and well here in Canada and how it will not stop with trans people. Like, that is the point I need folks to make. It's the same thing, like we are ceding territory on a few issues. Like, we tried to quote unquote cancel Jordan Peterson from coming to Ottawa for an event. And we had columns across far right media that was like, how dare them, they're, cancel culture or woke, rah. And I actually also didn't see a single article from a left-wing or even centrist, like a single column. I'm not talking about news coverage because that's a different conversation. I have not seen a single column from center or leftist publications or columnists defending what we were doing, because what we were doing was expressing our free speech, because saying a private venue shouldn't be making bank off of a bigot is actually a reasonable exercise of free speech. That's not cancel culture. That's corporations shouldn't be making money off hate.
No, I agree. I mean, and we've talked about this long, screamed into the void about how our media does a lot of pointing at external places, but not reflecting at how we have the very same trends here at home. Like every time we see coverage on the news of like, they're banning this in the States, they're banning this in the States with regards to like gender affirming care, drag shows, like all this stuff that's just like, bro, like, what are we, like, but we just report on it like, look at that thing that's happening far away from us, instead of like, and also in Canada, there is a risk of this because there are the people like Jordan Peterson, there are loads of people like that who are deeply, deeply like transphobic in what they share and put out there into society. But our media doesn't cover that. And it's a disservice, to be honest, because we've only got a handful of like media things. So like those ones have this like heightened responsibility to cover the diversity of stories that need to be told with the nuance that is necessary to combat the hate that's out there. And it's true for transphobia, it's true for anything related to white supremacy, Black lives, Indigenous justice, right? Like it's a whole lot of crap out there.
And increasingly, like the far right is great at this, right? Like, they'll publish 100 pieces, they'll come for people the second they can. Another example, like my friend Kat Haynes, who is the executive director of Justice Trans, she launched a phenomenal trans youth mentorship program in Saskatchewan and had a TERF rag magazine or TERF publication, big quotations, come for her and use her thesis and her art to demonize her. And it's like, it's things like that, right? Where we are mobbed, and that far right article unleashes a whole tsunami of hate. We have our personal information dug into, but there isn't that real defense from the folks that I would like to see recognizing that there is a principle at stake here if you let them come for trans people, and not even bothering to engage. And that's, you know, the organizations that release statements when I got mobbed around the Hershey experience, and there were a lot of them. It was phenomenal. But they were almost all organizations I had a relationship with. Like, there were organizations that knew me, that I'd been hired by, whose board I was on, or who I was connected to. And that's incredible to see from them. And I love that. But I don't, like, this isn't me. This isn't about me. This is about trans people's rights, trans justice, social justice, and human rights. And so it's hard when I see you shouldn't have to have a personal relationship with a trans person to care about trans issues and trans liberation. And that is also what I'm seeing right now.
You're right. Yeah. And I think so. I think what I also think about a lot is that that's the same sort of feeling. I feel like, I mean, I'm not Black, but I think that there was a lot of language around, like, I have a Black friend, I have a Black this, so therefore I care, versus like, I just care because it's the right thing to do, and it's my job to show up in solidarity here, because the expectation that trans people have to be on the front lines of fighting that, right, like at a system level in particular, right, because obviously at the individual level you're already up against a lot around you when society is not designed to like be embracing of the fluidity of gender, which is like constructed. This is not like, that's what's not natural, is like the way our society was created. Like, what's natural is the fluidity of gender and
trans folks. Gender diversity has been around, like, gender identity is like, gender diversity has existed since before we had like the English language,
right? Before
we had words as we understand them today as man and woman. Like, there have been folks who do not fit into gender roles or gender binaries or gender structures, like, for literally centuries, across hundreds and, like, at this point, thousands of cultures and times and places and spaces. And like, that is actually like, and there are times we've been honored and recognized where we've had spiritual and ceremonial and cultural roles, you know, not so much in my, I think, like, you know, Irish and Scottish ancestry, but in other contexts and places and spaces. But that had, like, we have always been here.
Yeah.
We're not an abnormality. Like, the idea that there's a trend in transness is both hilarious, because like, the world is hell for even the trans young folks coming out in schools right now. Like, I hate to break it to the world, but like, you know, transness is not perceived as trendy and cool. Most people think of transness, and this breaks my heart, because transness is beautiful and powerful and like wonderful, but there is still like a deficit narrative around transness. And so like, it absolutely, like, we have this idea of us as a fad when we've actually existed since before we had the language we're speaking in right now. Like, come on.
And I think this happens a lot where like, we act as if individuals are to blame or are the problem in a system that isn't designed for all of us. And that's what's really upsetting to me, because like, culturally speaking, when I think about like transness and gender fluidity, that is like, there is like stuff like that in South Asia, right? Where my ancestors are from. So I think a lot about how like that predates colonialism. It predates all of this shit that we're living in. So like, why are we acting like that's not natural and normal? And then
like white folks like to have we like to have short memories. Like, we imagine the world like started after colonization, and that like everything else.
Well, I mean, like the calendar was changed because Jesus was born. Like, I mean, like, white people, I mean, those, yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Let's
but there was like, we'd like to tell shorts, like, we have these impressions of this idyllic world that's never existed, that is like divorced as well from like white folks' own cultural ancestry and like all of that. We just think like it's this empty void, whereas gender is interesting and diverse and vibrant and has always been around.
The world is so weird. It's so sad, and it's so problematic, which better proves why we need to all be here. We have to do the work. I think something that I've been really leaning into more is in spaces, and I invite people to try this out. When you're in work, when you're in social settings, when you're in family settings, when you're in public, should you feel safe enough to do so? Because there is, like, obviously, depending on your, you know, identities, sometimes it's not super safe, but I'm trying to lean into, like, I don't have an exact answer for why what someone is saying is not right, but I know in my body that's you know, it's feeling sticky, it's feeling icky, it's feeling not good, and it's feeling hate, and it's feeling division, and it's feeling fear, and to just speak up saying, hey, what you're saying is problematic and it doesn't sit well with me, and I need you to stop, or I need this conversation to be over. Like, either we move on, or we like I don't think we need to take on the immediate labor of becoming experts, right? Like
I don't think most people, like when I work, like I often, like I don't expect cis folks to memorize every definition. Like there are a lot of gender identities. I love all of them, but I also am never going to be able to keep track of all of them. I need to know what your name is, how to be nice, like how to not be like rude to you. And then the rest of it is like, it's like like to social workers, I say person-centered care, respect for like the individuals, the best expert in their own experience. Like, there's this thing that happens where cis folks walk on eggshells around trans people because they're so worried they're going to say something wrong. And I'm sitting here being like, if you could spend 5 minutes like as a fly on the wall in a room of trans people, we are just joking and having fun with our, like, gender is stupid. We all know it. Like, there's no ask. We can feel it when folks walk on eggshells around us. And it's just accurate. We're not asking for folks to be experts or to be perfect. We're just asking you to treat trans folks as human beings and not be weird. And that really is a lot of it. Just don't be weird and we're going to be okay.
Right. And that's why I'm like challenging people and inviting people to, like, if you're hearing stuff like that feels transphobic, if you're hearing any sort of hate, you don't need to know the deep history of like where transphobia started. Not transness, because that's been around forever, but where the transphobia started. You don't need to have all those details. You just have to take up space by being like, look, this is problematic. You need to think about how you're showing up, person who's saying hateful things. Can we either move on to a different subject matter, or I'm going to call it and leave the room? Like, it's just taking one step. You don't got to run yet. Just take a couple steps of saying those things in spaces, because being quiet and letting people spew hate around you, it adds up. It adds up in policies, it adds up in spaces, and we need to start getting comfortable being imperfect in how we just go like, that's messed up. I'm sorry, that's messed up. You gotta figure out,
I often, like I said, like ground it in one of two things. Ground it in like, I believe firmly in human rights, diversity, and inclusion, and I believe the things that you were saying are exclusive or exclusionary and discriminatory towards the group.
Right.
Or, you know, that made me uncomfortable, and I know like that, it's as simple as that. Like, we don't need to, I don't expect, like, it's also not productive to just yell like you're a transphobe at people generally in most spaces. But it is like, you don't need to know all the answers. Just like stick to your principles, stick to your values, and name it. And exactly as Sam's saying, just name it and you're going to be good.
Let's pivot into what I think is kind of exciting, because I think in the media, we've been seeing more representation in movies and films and in other places that highlights the fluidity of gender, that highlights trans people. What are some movies, TV shows, books, podcasts, like, that get you excited, that make you go like, it's about damn time? Like, you know, like, just pumped about what's going on.
See if I have my book. I have a, no. Oh, yes. So this is my favorite trans book. It is not the only, but it is in my books the best.
Okay.
This is Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars by Kai Cheng Tom. It is a book about a trans girl who runs away from home, goes to a magical city, and ends up beating up icky cis straight white dudes who are in a trans girl gang, which I think is like the most badass story you could ever imagine. So that's one. This is like, if you're a baby trans girl or a baby trans person, or if you just want a good fiction read that has like a good emotional pull and all of the things, it is perfect for you. And follow everything that Kai Cheng Tom does. She's one of the best writers and thinkers trans folks in Canada got going on. So that's one. The second is Pose FX. It is a TV show. It's got a few seasons now, and I think it's done, which makes me very sad. But it is set in the 1970s in New York ballroom culture. And so it is essentially Paris is Burning, but like TV show. And I'm stealing that description from Noah Parchman, who will watch this at some point. But it is like, it's all of the actors who are depicted as trans folks are played by trans people. and it shows you like trans women and largely like Black gay men and racialized men like navigating ballroom culture and poverty and hate and the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and it will both make your heart sing and make your heart break at the same time in the most powerful ways. But I love it because I often find we have a very sanitized and like, again, like white middle class impression of transness right now. And like, that is not the reality of transness. Like most trans folks, even white trans folks, are like not making a whole lot of money. But in particular, we've like left behind and forgotten that like trans movements rose out of street queens and Black racialized trans women who were often doing like what we would now call mutual aid and keeping each other alive and housed and supported and fed, while also saying, you know, all cops are bastards and we need a better world for everybody and doing some sex work and all of the good things. Pose shows you that in a way that I don't think any other media I've ever seen has. So please, God, if you take one thing from this entire experience, watch Pose.
That's amazing. I've actually never seen Pose. I watch a lot of television, but I've never seen Pose, but it's largely because it's on FX.
Yeah.
But I feel like it might also be on Disney Plus now. I'm not sure why I think that. I just feel like it might. So now I know what I'm going to be Googling tonight. Any other orgs and stuff you think that we should be caring about? So you said Justice for Trans, but you said there were 2 national.
So I think like it's hard. Like I think like Justice Trans is the only like national nonprofit org. There's like the Canadian Professional Association for Transgender Health. And I don't know how much they're up to right now, and I hope they are doing well. But we don't have many, like that's about it. We've got a lot of phenomenal local initiatives. You're in Toronto, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. So like LGBT Youth Line has a hell of a lot of stuff for trans and gender diverse folks going on. The 519's Trans People of Color Project, and I think they have one specific to like a food program for racialized trans folks are 2 phenomenal examples. I think we have Kanzutawe right across the river from me. Like there are countless phenomenal local trans orgs, but the best way to find the one near you that you could support or connect with is at the Enchante Network's website, and they are the national network of 2SLQI plus organizations all across Canada. And the other org I'd like to shout out is the Canadian Centre for Gender and Sexual Diversity, led by the incredible Debbie Usuachia. Debbie is like a powerhouse in this sector and has done so much for that organization as well. And Jamie Sadgrove, who is one of their employees, is a phenomenal human, and they are powerhouses in this sector and doing some phenomenal work.
That's amazing. If there's one thing you want people to champion moving forward in little ways in their life, or big ways or whatever, like what is that one thing that you think we can all be doing?
It's so corny, and it's so like Ottawa bubble, but I know that like write to your damn parliamentarians and tell them that you care about trans people and that you would like to see the government of Canada, government of Ontario, whichever province and territory you're in, that you would like to see them do more on anti-trans hate and just support 2S LGBTQ community organizations. Those are 2 asks that need to be echoed everywhere. And the sad thing is that politicians get away with like taking a pretty photo op and putting out a little press release and then throwing like little bits of bucks at our community. And that's because straight folks eat it up. You know, most of the people who, there aren't, like gay folks do not make up 50% of the population. Unfortunately, not yet. We're working on it. That is a joke. Nobody is allowed to take that quote out of context, please God. I've had enough far-right articles about things that I've said taken out of context already, which is another thing I could say about how much I have to worry about everything that I say in public now. But to get back to the thing, it is, you know, straight folks don't change their votes based off how much you do for 2SLQI plus communities. They change their votes based off if you look like you do that stuff versus if you don't. And so, like, it doesn't, like, the liberals literally just need to, like, not make straight people worried and not, that's, like, to show straight people enough things that they do for gay folks that they're going to keep those votes. But, you know, people don't care as much, like, people do not care as much about queer and trans issues as they care about a range of issues. And it is important to people, but politicians know they can get away with lackluster support and keep our communities in poverty for decades and keep doing not enough to support our health, our well-being, our safety for ages, like, especially after marriage equality, because all of the straight folks were like, all right, you gave the gays their thing. Now liberation is here. And I'm like, even the most privileged gay folks, like white gay men still experience socioeconomic disadvantage because of their gayness. They still risk being kicked out. And they're still like the privileged members of our communities. But like straight folks are willing to turn a blind eye to that and they won't vote for queer people. Just like they often won't vote for Black people's rights or Indigenous rights or decolonization. But like, there is this need to make MPs at least think that we'll change our vote if they don't do enough for gay people and queer people and trans people.
I wholeheartedly agree. And I think when you're reading, when something comes up in the news that you really care about, you know, like if it's, where's money going towards to you know, support gender and sexuality and all that stuff in Canada, or where's money going to support women, or where's money going to address the income inequality that's going on. I always try to look for something in those policies or for reporters who are speaking to that component that centers low income, disabled, trans people, Black people, and Indigenous people. That's what I search for. Because if we protect our most vulnerable, which is the point of the fucking public system that we have, it's to not take care of Drake, it's to take care of those that are the most vulnerable. And they're vulnerable because of system gaps. Not that they're not strong, resilient, incredible people, but because the system has these gaps. When you look, that's where I look at, like, how are they supporting that? Because if we help that community of people, everybody rises up. So it's really like the most sustainable way to address the issues. It's just like common sense. It's just not politically cute.
And look beyond like this government in particular, and like so you know, two statements are true. They have done more than any government in Canadian history for 2SLGI plus people. That is the truth. Two, they have done the very least that they can for 2SLGI plus communities almost every single step of the way. Like they banned conversion therapy. And that was great. I stand by that. It was a good moment. We had to fight with them. They first weren't going to do it. Then we had to get them to do it. And then we had to work with them to make it so that the bill that they drafted wasn't bad. But then we never actually wanted to end with a conversion therapy ban. Mm-hmm. There are thousands of survivors who have been traumatized and harmed by this practice. They need to access counseling and support. They need services and interventions. We need to actually make sure that, like, while we've banned it, we've actually like found and stopped the conversion therapists who are doing the damage. Right. And so that's one. I could bring every policy issue this government has acted on for queer and trans issues. I can show you what they said in the press release, and I can tell you what actually happened. And that's the one benefit of like being the gal who will bother them until they let me know what's going on. But it is like they gave us $100 million in an action plan. That sounds really good. $100 million. Look at how much money they spend on new like Navy boats. Look at how much money they give to every Navy boats. Now you know what I mean. I do. Yeah. But it's like $100 million over 5 years across all these provinces and territories, and I'm sitting here being like, that is drops in the bucket. But it looks good to any of us because we're not millionaires, and it sounds like a lot of money. Yeah. But it's just not. That's like $3 per person in Canada over 5 years. Yeah. Like,
and it's similar to like, and it's not just this subject matter, right? It's also like, I remember writing something that's saying like Trudeau hasn't done enough, and someone from his staff responded being like, he's done more than anyone else for Indigenous justice. And I was like, but more is not enough. Like
that's not the bar.
It's
the bar
not
is good,
like
better. The bar is get us where we need to be.
Right. And I think that's what I always like get a little boggled in my brain around, because it does feel like the bare minimum, and it's great. It's amazing that you're doing something, but like, do it all, like address the whole thing. But yeah, I think we should do lives more often, just so that one, we can see each other more, because we need to stop meeting in random places.
Like in the Yukon?
Yeah.
How we both happen to be at the same hotel by accident?
By accident. In the Yukon. Yeah. But instead of that, though that was fun, we should do lives more often. We should connect more often. We should keep talking about how people can better show up for the trans community, for the low-income community, the disabled community, and racialized community. Our fights are all so intrinsically connected, and unless we start showing up with each other, we solve none of the things. So
I say one last thing. I just want to emphasize, like, the folks who are going to get hurt the most by rising anti-trans hate are trans folks living in rural and remote communities where there's already a whole lot of homophobia, and it's going to be Black, Indigenous, and racialized trans. And so it is like, you know, folks that I might get pummeled, but I'm a privileged white middle-class lady, like, at the end of the day. It is very much the, like, folks' material realities that are at risk here, and that is folks in our downtown cores. But, like, the reality of rural, remote, queer, and trans people is so different from my own. And that's where hate is going to take root and escalate, because that is where the far right is recruiting more than anywhere else. And so we need to center rural and remote communities in this work, too.
Agreed. Thank you so much for being here, Faye. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening with your partner and your ferrets. And I will chat with you soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sam.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.